What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. If you don't already know, I'm Pony Lawson, and today we are breaking down artist tattoos. What's up, guys? Big news, I've finally got some merch. I've got this design and many others on a bunch of cool items. We've got hoodies, we've got bomber jackets, we've got socks, you name it, I've got it. And what's even cooler is I got my friend Sabrina's help, who is actually a director over at Disney Animation. That's why they look so dope. I'm super lucky to have her help, and I hope you guys are just as excited as I am. So use the link below and go stock up on a bunch of cool shit. Thanks again, Sabrina, for all the help, and thank you guys for all the support. Once again, welcome back. As I said before, today is all about artist tattoos, so let's just jump right into it and check out submission number 1 sent in by Andrew Romero. My first impressions are I really like this design. I think it's pretty funky. I do think the inner lines on this tattoo could be a bit thinner. That way it just gives you a little more room to play with some line weights. I like having the thick, bold outline around the entire perimeter, and then with those thinner outlines on the inside, I just think it would make for a really nice contrast. There's something about the backside I'm just not the biggest fan of. It kind of flattens out a bit, and I think if you just had some sort of variation of size of mushrooms or different colors, I think that would help out quite a bit. I also think the neck blends in a little bit too much with the skull. I think if you were to have a thicker outline around the top of that skull, it would help break that apart a bit more. And I'm not sure if that's what you were trying to do, is blend that together a bit, but I just don't feel like it's working. I think it would look a little better if that neck was coming out at the top of the skull and that skull was a bit more in the foreground. I also noticed you had one singular blue mushroom down at the bottom of this tattoo near the skull's mouth, and I think if you had some more of those blue mushrooms on top, where the hair would be, it would just add some nice variation and it wouldn't look so cluttered. I also see in the email that you mentioned that this wasn't your original design, that this is something the client brought in. And that being said, I'm not sure if this is a tattoo design meant for somebody else or if this is something you found on Pinterest, so I can't really say much there. But overall, it's not a bad design. There are definitely some things that you could have changed up to enhance the overall piece, and it would have made it a little more your own. As I said, using various line weights, tidying up the back part of the head, and separating that skull from the neck a bit more would have really brought this thing to the next level. Thank you so much, Andrew, for sending that over. Up next, we've got a couple sent in from Val, and Val, this first one you sent over, I really like. I love the texture you managed to capture in the jacket, and I think the overall idea where these two hands are holding is just super cool. I do think you could have afforded to zoom in or crop the original reference a bit more, so that way there's less of that solid black and the focus is definitely more on the hands. Bringing those hands to the lower third would really draw our eyes to them a bit more, and getting rid of some of that black I don't think would be a bad thing, but I don't hate it. I think the only thing that really matters are those hands, and the rest just feels like filler. But great job nonetheless. Let's check out the next one. This thing is super dope. I love how you have this very thin outline around the entire thing, which I see a lot of people not doing, and it just keeps the entire tattoo nice and crisp. It's one of those things that you don't really notice, but you feel. The eyes are damn near perfect, and they are so little. So good job there. Another thing I notice you are really good at is building texture, like in the horn and in the little neck cape. But it all feels like different material, and that's kind of what adds that contrast in texture. I also really like the silhouette of this tattoo. If we were to make the entire thing black, it would still have a really cool shape. The only thing that I really have to nitpick are these two horns that are almost intersecting on the left-hand side. I wish there were just a little bit of space between those two. But other than that, this thing is awesome. Keep it up, Val. Excellent job. Thank you so much for sending that in. Next up, we've got one from Jaden Olson, and Jaden, you sent in this cute little fox tattoo. Two things. The first one being, I think you really nailed that fur texture. And from my experience, I think fur is one of the hardest things to do. And the second thing I want to talk about is the background. Not a fan. This is one huge pet peeve of mine, when people just shade around something to block it in, but don't really give it any shape. I know you put the shading in the background to set off those lighter tones of the fur, but you gotta give it some sort of shape and not just this weird gray edge. It's one of those things where I try to add shades next to something that's white or skin tone, but I'll generally try to lose that shade before it hits something else that's shaded, in this case, the flower. Which, if I'm being honest, I didn't know it was a flower at first. It took me a second to kind of see. I know backgrounds are generally an afterthought, but if you can pull it off well, it makes the entire tattoo look complete and gives it a really nice shape. But you've got some nice tricks throughout this entire tattoo. The little white whiskers that are coming down from the chin, the black thin whiskers that are around the face. The only thing that really loses it for me is that background. I'm also just unsure what that circular thing is in the background up at the top left. It just feels unnecessary. But as far as the focal point of this tattoo, I do think you nailed it. The only thing I can really say is just work on those backgrounds and don't let them feel like they're an afterthought. Because if all that gray wasn't in here, I think it would be really excellent. Thank you so much, Jaden, for sending that over. All right, real quick, I want to take a break and give a shout out to the sponsor of our channel, Mad Rabbit. Mad Rabbit is a tattoo aftercare company that has something for everyone. Whether you're a new tattooer or a longtime veteran, they've got you covered. So head on over to madrabbit.com and check out all they have to offer. And be sure to use code PONY20 to save 20% off your entire order. All right, let's get back to it. Up next, we've got one by Cameron, and Cameron, you sent over this red lady face inside of a Sacred Heart. Well, I don't know if it's really a Sacred Heart, but I guess kind of. We'll call it a Sacred Heart. First thing I'm gonna say about this tattoo is I wish you shaved all those hairs. It's just one of those things that really bother me when I see a fresh tattoo. You gotta take the time to shave all the stuff off because it is pretty distracting when it's up next to all these smooth shades. Especially in those dark areas around the eyes, you've just got these white little highlight looking things. They just don't belong. Get them out of there. And it just makes it look like she has a hairy nose. Again, I'm not even really looking at the tattoo at this point because I'm so distracted by all this hair. Knock it off. All right. Let me focus here. I do think the red shades are super smooth, and the same thing could be said about the blues. It does look like a few things got chewed up, the top of the top lip and the top of the bottom lip. It maybe seems like you tried to add a highlight, but it kind of got away from you. Another thing I wish you would have done different is add more of that solid black in the eyebrow toward the center of the eye, leaving only maybe like 5 or 6 strands of hair, not the 20 strands that you currently have. It would really help the eyebrows look a lot more natural. You gotta be really careful when you add shades into areas that you know are gonna be yellow, because it just ends up changing that yellow tone into a weird green, as you can see on all these little yellow parts. I think it would have been a lot more strong and dynamic if it were all just solid yellow. The top flame is a little weird, especially those big, thick black outlines. I think those could have been thinned down a bit more, and those thin lines running through the flames are a weird shape. If I were to have added those lines in the flame, I would have most likely went in the same direction as the flame, or just left them out altogether. Because right now it's looking a little shrimpy. And I know it's glary up top, but those outlines are a little worrisome. I fear they may end up as scars at some point. But I gotta say, tattooing for only a year, you're not doing too bad. And these are the things that you're gonna end up ironing out over time. Thank you so much, Cameron, and keep at it. The next one sent in is from Justin, and Justin, you sent over this cute little snail disco ball little guy. This is a one snail party. I do like the texture that you have in the snail. I don't think it was quite necessary to add that same texture to the disco ball. Another thing this tattoo is missing a lot of is solid blacks, as well as outlines like around that left antenna. Over time, it's only gonna fall apart if there's nothing really there to hold it together. Outlines are not a bad thing, especially if you can pull off a nice thin outline. They just keep things looking sharp for a long time. Now, I know disco balls can be a very difficult thing to tackle because there are all these perfect little squares and all these shades that need to go in right where they belong, and they have to be put in precisely, otherwise things can start to fall apart rather quickly. Now, I don't think you did a horrible job here, it's just not as clean as it should be. The disco ball is probably the thing that you should have taken the most time on because that's where our eyes are drawn. And I will say the little light reflections are kind of cheesy. You also sent over the healed photo, and as I was saying before, this thing is missing a lot of solid black. It's also missing some outlines, like on the snail's, we'll call that a chest, around the antenna and around the backside of that disco ball. Again, they don't have to be strong, bold outlines, just something to separate the tattoo from the wearer's skin tone. I will say white is a vital part of this tattoo, but since you have so much skin tone next to those white areas, it just healed a bit messy. And again, this just goes back to being precise in the way that you put those squares in there. Those tiny little outlines matter, and this is definitely a tattoo that you should not be rushing through. It is a cute tattoo, but if I stand back and look at this thing, it definitely does not scream disco ball at me, especially with the healed photo. Again, I think it's a solid attempt, but this is a rather difficult tattoo to tackle. I will say that one of the other tattoos you sent in, the geisha face, does come off a lot more clean. It doesn't look like you're trying to pack all this little detail into one small area. It definitely seems like this one is more in your lane. I'm not gonna get too far into the weeds on this tattoo. I mean, I will say the hair looks a little chunky, and I'm not the biggest fan of the background shape. I will say this one is a lot more readable, and it definitely flows with a leg nicely. So thank you, Justin, for sending those over. All right, that's gonna be it for the critiques, but you know we gotta give a shout out to my favorite artist of the week. And this week there were a lot of really good submissions, but unfortunately I can only pick one, and this week the prize goes to Val. This thing is pretty damn on point. There's not much for me to say about it or that I don't like. You got all the outlines, all the textures, all the little bells and whistles. This thing is dope. I mean, what else can I say that I haven't said already? The eyes are dope, the nose is perfect. You nailed it with all these little details. So once again, congratulations, Val, on being my favorite this week. All right, now I want to shine a spotlight on an artist who I think you should all be following, and that is Lena Alexandrova, who goes by Mama Stiflera out of Russia. I recently stumbled across her work, and I gotta say I am in love with the stuff that she's pumping out. She has a very unique style, and you can tell she draws her ass off. And you can definitely tell she's found her own style by doing so. She seamlessly blends pop culture into this cartoony, new schooly vibe that literally jumps off the skin. When you look at her designs, you can tell they're hers right off the bat. That's how you know she's developed her own style. And that comes from nothing but years of drawing. I definitely think she's one to follow and be inspired by, so go check her out and let her know I sent you. All right, guys, that's gonna be it. I wanna give a huge thank you to all the artists who submitted their tattoos, and don't forget to subscribe while you're here. As always, I will see you guys next week.